Another day at the beach. So we're looking at the waveform dynamics going on here. This time I want to talk about not the rocks, but quantity and quality. And so quantifying things and qualifying things. What is its quality? What is its qualification? Right now, this rock has the quality of slipping away from me. And the course that it took to get away from me could be looked at as a navigational feat. But does the rock actually navigate? But it does follow the geometry of the physics within itself and within the field that it followed in the course of slipping away from me to get down there in the crags. And somehow I came up with 3. I didn't know if I picked up the right one, so I just picked up. Now look at the quantity has increased. I started off with 2. I was going to just separate one and start with talking about one, and then the other slipped away from me. I had to go down there and get it, and came back up with 3. Who knows what will happen next? I may come back up with 4, or there's rocks everywhere, all kinds of shapes and sizes. So quantifying them in their natural state there isn't so simple. Now you can approach it simplistically from your own mind. Take a simplistic approach out of your own mind. So it would be your own mind with the simplicity and your own mind with the complexity that you would apply at seeing into that system of distributions and dynamic distribution that's moving. It may look steady and set in place right now, but over long durations of time, duration is always a factor. Over long durations of time, there are changes that apply to the distribution. And if you look closely, you can see changes in terms of water splashing onto the rocks, wetting them, and then the sun shining down on it and drying it out, and then another wave coming and bringing water to wet it again. And so if you quantify the rock by its weight, you'll find that some are wet. And so the density package that has the volume of rock, its geological makeup, and the more complex package of the rock in its volume and form, you'll find it's not straightforward quantifying them even that way, because some will be wet and some will be dry. And some that are wet, when you begin to quantify them, you could set them on the most sensitive scale possible and set them on their wet out here in the sun, and you'll see the value of their weight on the scale slowly changing by their microgram or whatever fraction of a gram is able to track the rate of evaporation of water off of the rock out here in the open sun. And then if you took it inside where there wasn't an open sun exposure, then you would have the rock changing weight at a different rate, if not changing weight at all, because the energy of the sun not setting things into motion, where you have the water evaporating away in a course of motion away from where the water was deposited on the rock. And even here, the water, the body of water, you can begin to start to quantify it, but you're losing water to evaporation. That's where these clouds are coming from. So are things fixed enough to then begin to quantify them and say that's a fixed quantity? Now, if you're quantifying it by weight, what quantity of grams, what quantity of ounces, what quantity of pounds or kilograms makes up this rock? Or do you quantify it as just one object? That is so general and so vague. It has a quantity of one what? One rock? One rock of what shape? What size? Look, that's where it comes from. And look at all the different shapes and all the different sizes. So when you begin to quantify something, you open up something that's far beyond your proverbial can of worms. And so when you're learning arithmetic and mathematics, you need to approach it with a humility that's placed before reality. Who knows? Maybe you don't have to be humble towards mathematics and, arithmetic and doing physics. That's a compromise anyway from what mathematics and physics are trying to delve into, what it's trying to illustrate. So this is one volume. Maybe we could say it's one package of weight, or it's one package of volume, a geometric volume. But then that geometric volume has a shape. Each of these rocks has a unique shape, a unique volume. And then let's imagine that we get identical volumes with identical shapes, just to make it easier. Have we really made it easier, or are we in yet another illusion of simplifying the math or arithmetic approach to it? So if we get two identical squares with the same volume, same shape and everything, that's what two identical squares would be. And you add them together. They're separate. Now you add them together. Their union becomes a quantity of two identical squares. But does that truly or fully quantify them in the full aspect of what they are? Or is that just a shallow approach towards things coming together? Or an approach to things coming apart, subtracting, adding, So even when they're identical, did they add together this way? Did they add together this way? Did they add together this way? So you could have a corner of the square adding to the face, flat face, the sharp angular corner of one square adding to the flat face, surface of the other identical square or cube. Let's call it a cube, not a square. Sorry, a volume would actually be a cubic function. So squares constructed together to make a cube. So the square face of one cube identical to the other, except you add them together where the angular corner of one cube touches the flat face of the other cube. Now adding them together in that way produces one geometric configuration that's not the same as if you would add them together, flat face to flat face, flat surface to flat surface. And then when they join together as one, the quality, the geometric quality that identifies them as a cubic, square cube, would then change to the combination of both of them looking like a rectangular cube or box, a rectangular box. And so if you're looking at the shape for its quality, it's obloid, pebble shaped. We tend to see quality through the shapes of things. We can look at color and see it in terms of quality. We can feel the texture and call that a quality. We can go to water and touch its texture and feel that it's wet. We can touch this and feel that it's dry, but then it's also a bit rough, a smoother grade of roughness, versus touching this and it's a rougher grade of roughness. Or maybe this is a rougher grade of smoothness. Or is it a smoother grade of roughness? So which way do you approach it from? Well, it's always normal and natural to take the middle way. So yeah, have a perspective that looks at it as a smoother grade of roughness and a perspective that has it as a rougher grade of smoothness. And looking at this one that's on the rougher end of the quality spectrum that says, is it rough, is it smooth? So now we're looking at the quality of things. But are quality and quantity separate? So I opened up this subject talking about the complexity of quantifying things, the quantity of rocks down there, but they don't all weigh the same. They don't all have the same volume. They don't all have the same shape. And all of that gives a quality to the bigger picture. And the quality emerges in the confusion of the quantification arrangement in the distribution. So you can look at it as a collage and you'll have a sense of quality about it. But the quality is emerging out of that complex geometric configuration. So when I say this has a smoother form of roughness, you go down maybe with a microscope, doesn't have to be too high powered, just to see the fineness of the grain deeper down. And you will see a geometric configuration producing that texture, which we can't see while we're feeling it, but we can feel it and say, that's the quality of smoothness, or the quality of roughness, or the quality of something in between smoothness and roughness. And create a spectrum view of that quality. Scale it between roughness and smoothness. Anywhere in between, maybe something's off the chart. And having a spectral view of it is the beginnings of quantification. So how do we have quantity interfacing with quality? We want to look at quality and we overlay quantification, and we look at quantity and we overlay qualities. And this is a very important thing to understand with complex systems. Layers of complexity within layers of complexities, layers of complexity beyond, outside of layers of complexities. We might be on the inside layer of complexity and not looking at the layer of complexity outside. of the system influencing the system that you're in touch with on the inside. And then the layer of complexity that you're in touch with on the inside may have another layer of complexity. So we can look at the complex arrangements of rocks here and the complex geometry that you can get lost in for decades, studying how it comes together in relationship with the water and its own complexity and the systems beyond that create complexity into the movements of the water. So it wouldn't be separate from weather systems, atmospheric systems, and all of that feeds in information in the form of qualities, quantities, into the processes that shape the rocks here, grinding them down with blasting sand around. Waves get big enough to pick up big rocks and slam them into other big rocks and break them apart. And then just the constant rubbing of the water with sand in it, grinding things away. And then the geometry of the water moving around the rocks has a lot of that curvature, which then works to shape the rocks slowly. And the shape of what is being formed, the shape that the clay takes, will be relative to the shape of the hands that form the clay. When you're talking about the potter makes nothing that is outside of the possibilities in his own hands, form and function, the function of his hands. So you'll have curves and all kinds of geometry possible in the configurations of his hands and how he could apply it to the clay as he's forming and shaping it. And that can tell you a lot. You're looking at the pottery and the form that it has after it's been made. And if you really understand the complex dynamics of form and function, you can read the clay pot to determine things about the hands that made it. The kind of insight and experience you would need to do that, though, is as in-depth as coming here and reading the scatter plot of rocks and seeing patterns that correlate to the geometry pattern in the movements of the water. And if you just take a quick look, the geometry patterns in the water don't look quite the same as the geometry patterns in the distribution of the rocks, but there is a relationship because these rocks are moved into place by the water. And so it's not just one set of waves or one wave energy pattern. So today this is the wave energy pattern. On another day you can have waves rolling in 10 times as high as this. The kind of waves that pick up boulders from there and put them way over there, and then seeing the wave splash go way up. The same thing going there. So in between quality and quantity, quantification and qualification, is the oneness that they belong to, the unity that they belong to. That the quality we see at the shore within the water itself, you notice how the quality of the water changes. Here there's a lot of whitewash, there it's smoother. So that's a quality change within the water itself. And then you'll see a quality change in the rocks. The rocks closer to the water have a certain look, and the rocks farther from the water have a different look. So this line is the middle way, and the closer the water gets to the middle way, the more its quality changes. The closer the rocks get to the middle way, the more its quality changes. Then, the farther it gets away from the middle way, it has a more standard quality to it. Looking at the texture, just the texture, not quantifying. There's quantification in there shaping the quality, and there's quality in there shaping the quantities that you can find. All one, if you have the right perspective. So, middle way dynamics. And you can do quantifying, you can do qualifying. You can do quantifying, you can do qualifying. Look at it, just say, oh, qualities, and enjoy yourself that way. Look at it, say, oh, qualities, and enjoy yourself that way. Look at it and say quantities and enjoy it that way. Look at it and say quantities and enjoy it that way. Or look at it as quantity and quality, as quantity and quality, and two sides making one. I play in the shore where the water meets the sand, and I never get the experience there as two separate things. When I experience the quality of it, it's all the same. When I get moved by the water, I'm moved in the sand, and I can feel my feet forming into the sand as the water comes and informs me into the sand and informs the sand into how it forms and reforms under me. And it all feels like one experience. And the interplay is a union. And just like the interplay for quantity and quality, the quality of water, you go down to the atomic level and things start to look all the same. You start to see quality disappear. You actually have to look closer to see atomic numbers, that distinguish one atom from the other. And there can be geometry in the arrangement of the things that constitute the atomic numbers. So a geometric arrangement, so differing arrangements, different numbers, different arrangements of the numbers. So we have 3 here. That's an arrangement of 3. This is another arrangement of 3. That's another arrangement of 3. This is another arrangement of 3. And we can go on and on with an arrangement of 3. So just because you have a number, a quantity of 3, the quality becomes it because of the possibility for 3 to be expressed geometrically this way, expressed geometrically this way, expressed geometrically this way, and all kinds of ways that it can be expressed. My hand right now is limited in the ways that it can manipulate these rocks. So you can play around with other ways of manipulating the rocks to get them in different configurations of adding together to be a quantity of 3 rocks. You can switch the rocks out to make them more identical or different shapes. So it ends up opening a whole world of quality possibilities. And so at the atomic level, because of the geometric reconfiguration, even though atoms seem like a uniform thing, why isn't everything uniform? Why isn't everything solid like rock or solid like metal? Why isn't everything just liquid, or why isn't everything just air? Why do we have the diverse mix of qualities in the expression of atoms that become elements, and then elements themselves combining geometrically to become compounds, and then compounds combining and building out from there? And so at the elemental level, the geometric configuration of atoms to put together elements, the geometric possibilities are extensive. And so at the elemental level, you have all kinds of elements that can come together to make water, and then elements that can come together to make rock, elements that can, and then you can have elements that make water but reconfigure in a different way, and they'll make some other kind of liquid. It may look like water, but the way it interfaces with other things will start to show that, hey, it has a relationship with other things in ways that don't match how water relates to those things. Hydrogen peroxide, hydrogen and oxygen make up water. The same hydrogen and oxygen in different number ratios of hydrogen and oxygen will combine to make hydrogen peroxide. And you'll look at the hydrogen peroxide and it will look just like water until you decide to, say, dip your feet in it or drink it or swim in it. Who knows? I've never weighed hydrogen peroxide, but I wouldn't be surprised if putting an equal portion of hydrogen peroxide in one cup to match a portion of water in another cup, and have the cups also be identical and weigh the same, and weigh them both on the scale and find that hydrogen peroxide and water might not have the same weight. I'm not sure about that. Who knows? If one has more hydrogen than oxygen, the hydrogen would be lighter, and that should make the liquid lighter. So you do accounting for the numbers that gather together in a geometric configuration, and you can come up with weight. And then the way they pack together, do they add together loosely? Do they add together closely? How much space in between them? And then the weight to volume ratio starts to become something other than just the weight. And then you can think about density. So when you hear in physics talk about density, weight, and all of that, they're all geometric functions. And so everything put in terms of geometric functioning. And the relationship between everything will also be geometric. And the expressions that grow out of that relationship will also be geometric. So quantification is a geometric thing. You may be dealing with one-dimensional numbers, playing around with them, one dimension added to one dimension on paper. That's what they do in school, basic arithmetic. But even then, you draw the number symbolically on paper in two-dimensional form, and then that's a compromise away from the three-dimensional reality where all of this is supposed to apply. So there's a gap between two-dimensional practice and study of math and geometry, and then the three-dimensional world where math and geometry come from. And so it's no surprise once you understand that, it's no surprise that there's a problem with school systems graduating people who learned math and proved well in class in the form that the class has people prove themselves, and then getting out in the real world and having problems with application, applying that math. And if you're able to overcome that handicap and you come out into the real world and start to understand how application works, you'll find that the way the schools are teaching becomes a culture of knowledge that's in a cocoon of its own perspective, which essentially the cocoon is a limitation, a barrier around something. So it sees no further than that, it grows no further than that. But a cocoon, you can mature out of it, break out of it, mature out of it, spread your wings and fly out into the greater world. Being in school on paper and getting, flying A's all the time isn't going to shelter you or save you from the three-dimensional world of reality and any number of dimensions beyond just three. And that in itself is a quality thing, a quality of education. And that education standard is rating you according to quantities, quantifying your performance. And your performance is essentially a quality in itself. And their rating of you, your performance, their rating of your performance is a quality in itself, even though they're working with quantities, giving quantities to everything. Now, I'm not trying to say that quantities are wrong or that qualities are better. They both work together. So the problem arises when you are having yourself set into a way or workings that don't necessarily have a good grasp on that union out of which quantity and quality emerge. So it's not that all of this is subject to quantity. It's not that all of this is subject to quality. All of this is, and because of it, because of what it is, quality now has a place of existence. Quantity now has a place of existence out of it. Now, what more is there to come out of it? Can there be more? Is it simply a matter of the limitation of the cocoon that we are in our own form and function as human beings, walking on two legs, two arms, staying within our own skin and experiencing the world through only the number of senses that we experience the world through, and maybe being shut off from a number of other senses that we do have, but for some reason don't recognize or stay in touch with anymore. Maybe we have a culture that drives us away from the more that is there in the bigger picture of ourselves, say in the spread of our senses. Maybe there's more to our senses than the culture has us acculturated to. So a culture wants to put your focus in a place, and where they put your focus becomes a geometric positioning for shaping what the culture is supposed to be. So somewhere there are people, there are influencers who shape the culture. And so the culture will be limited according to those who shape the culture. Now, essentially everyone is a contribution to the shape of any culture, every single person. But there are those who take deliberate steps to position other people, determining over you where you will be, how you will behave, what you will think, and grading you according to that, and penalizing you or otherwise displacing you. So you can be here, you can do this. Because you don't meet this requirement, you can't be here, and you can't be here doing this or that. Just whatever they determine. And all of those, whatever they determine, and all of those things will be geometric placements in the grand scheme of what the culture is. And everything will be in geometric terms. Even something as insubstantial as time. How do you pick up time and say this is time and weigh it and measure it? You don't. You weigh mass. You follow its motion and rate it. and then a geometric relationship between motion and mass. In between that, you sort of come up with what time is. And so time ends up being a geometric pattern in itself, because we derive it out of the geometric patterns of mass and its motion, taking measurements by that. And yet, even something like time, that you can't say, here, I'm holding it, I'm weighing it, I'm measuring it directly as a substance, insubstantial, where even time is a geometric construct. So culture, you would think, well, where is culture? It's just an idea. Well, it's a form and function that produces a quality. And so the part of culture that seems so intangible, like what is it really? I can't really identify. That happens when you start looking at culture from the quality aspect of it. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can apply a geometric sense to the quality of things, but if you're not applying a geometric sense to it consciously, you'll just take it in as quality. And if you look at the senses that we use to determine quality, at the core of the operation of the senses for determining quality is the reading of geometry. When we look at something that has color, that's a geometric configuration of light waves, and they distribute into our eye reception geometrically, and they'll be routed according to their geometric shaping, and then go through the processing that our senses do, be further in with the mind, the brain, the neurology, or however all of that works. And there'll be a processing of all of that according to geometry to then produce the experience of what the color should be. Is it blue? Is it green? Is it red? Is it yellow? Is it black? Is it white? So they're not two separate things, and to think more about that will really help having an easier time with complex systems, where geometry and our application of logic to it and our musical sense about it. So what more can I add? I'll think about it for a minute. So I bring up the idea about the middle way at the shoreline, the middle way between the water and the land, where the land meets the water. And you'll see where the water gets to meeting the land, it changes its mass distribution and motion pattern distribution. And where the land meets the water, it changes its rock scattering and distribution of rock scattering. So that pattern of redistributing the mass is in the water, and it's reflected on the other side, redistributing the mass of the rocks. And it's a network of redistributing pathways, a network of redistributing pathways, reflecting on each other's side, on each side, reflecting each other from each side. And not just a direct reflection, but also contrast, not reflecting direct comparison, but also contrast. You can see definitely big contrast between water and the land, solid and liquid. A duality in positioning a duality in form, but they're part of the same system function. And that function is a geometric act, you could say a dance, and that's what imprints from the water into the land. But then as the water comes into the land to imprint itself into the land, it washes back with imprinting of the land's pattern into the water, flowing back into the water. And now that has shaped the water, and then the water coming back again. And so there's a constant interplay. So it sings its song, moves its dance into the water, and the water moves its song and moves its dance into the land. So the exchange going on, I want to say, is a multifaceted process, but multifaceted makes it sound like your typical geometry, but the geometric relationship is beyond just the physical form that you can see. There's gravity as a part of the orchestration. Time, can you hold it? Can you see it? That's a part of the orchestration. So if you remember in the first video where we were looking at the numerical and geometric modeling of piano scales, from the chromatic scale to the major scale, and we had the modeling show the geometry of two sides reflecting across a middle wave and a network of distributions between them. And so this is a network of distributions. The way that we fractaled the spectrum or the scales for the musical notes, you know, breaking them down to parts and pieces of the black notes, the white notes, should we say the straightforward notes, and the sharps and flat notes. So there would be dynamics in common within the function. We could say aspects that are universal, the middle way universality. But that doesn't mean that the dynamics are the same through and through. And in fact, the music theory model was just one way of modeling it. You can fraction it out in other ways. I didn't even cover the equilateral shapes, the equilateral chords and scales, the ones that would be more diminished and augmented chords, diminished and augmented scales, equilateral six-sided shapes, equilateral four-sided shapes, equilateral 6, 4, and 3-sided shapes, all equilateral. We have those shapes, and they give their own tonal quality. So again, geometry having a quantity aspect to it and a quality aspect to it, and that the quantity and quality aspect are intertwined. It's at what scale of geometric quantification are you looking at? Eventually, the deeper scales of quantification will appear to the larger scale of our perspective as a quality. And quality is where we go for a less specific and a more generalized overview. And that's closer to what a quality is. And when we get more of a specific view, then we can get more into quantification, a general overview of the rocks, a quality of being scattered, rugged, jagged, rough. Water, a quality of being turbulent, flowing. And yet, in all of that, there is geometric patterning that's subject to quantification, or where quantification fits the geometric patterning. It's there to be had in that quality array. It's there to be had in the quality array of the water. The medians contrast. Water not quite the quality of rock, and yet they meet and share along the middle way. Maybe they don't really totally mix or dilute into each other, but to some extent they will, maybe a very minor extent. On the larger scale, they mingle and they share aspects of their form and function. So contrast as two opposites. I mean, I won't say don't look at it that way, but is it really two opposites? The characterization of the distribution here is in good part a function of the characteristics of the distribution of the water. The water and its movements and the way it breaks apart has put the breaking apart and distribution of the rocks into the form that it has. So in good part, this is a form that comes from that, and in good part you can see form in the water that comes from the rocks. And the more you get that insight, the more you see the dynamics of not being separated. But then it wouldn't be the middle way if you didn't have the contrast of seeing it as separated as well as seeing it as united. And then there's the perspective of yourself observing it and seeing it and your position in the matter. Am I really separate from it? If we see the dynamics and characteristics in both sides that they have in common as clues and evidence or proof of a union, or at least something in common, joining them in common, can we see some of those dynamics within our own form and function, where we're split down the middle along a middle way? So I covered that while we were talking about the piano scales and the geometric patterns they made around the middle way, and how it's very interesting that we're split down the middle. If you look at the higher brain, where we would think logic, the seat of logic is the brain somewhere in there, but you look at it split down the middle. Is that just split down the middle for mere balancing as we walk around? I'm sure that's part of the program, but the program is much deeper than that, much more multitasking than just one or two things, taking advantage of the middle way dynamics. I said in the comprehensive music theory breakdown that it had the middle way through and through. And when you think about the complex of the brain and its function, through and through, very complex, the middle way going through and through it, you could look down at each neuron and each synapse, a bridge between two neurons, or at least two parts of two neurons. And there will be a middle gap where all the activity happens, where all the communication back and forth, sharing parts and pieces and dynamics, and probably sharing forces, unseen forces that set things in motion. And then who knows what's going on down at the quantum physics particle scale. So looking at it through and through, where will you not see the middle way going through and through? So I'm bringing up the middle way dynamics where the water meets the land, as a simplicity, a simplistic pathway of entry into the complexity of what the system is. So all of this is a complex system. So where do you begin? So if you remember, I said one simplicity, two simplicities. Then you grow complexity from there. So where the complexity is already in place, you could backtrack into saying that the simplistic basis of that complexity having grown out from simplicity, that simplistic basis is still there. So maybe you can't see the exact simplistic basis from which it all came, but the idea is to get you into thinking about the simplistic basis within it all, and to find one to latch into. And the biggest one of all, and quite universal, is the middle way dynamics. So essentially, we're looking for a simplistic pattern because it's complexity, and we can tell the quality of complexity by the pattern. That's a complex pattern. Complex looks chaotic. That's a signal that it's hard to understand, it's hard to follow, it's hard to grasp. And when it's hard to follow, hard to grasp, hard to understand, it's hard to think of it quantitatively in terms of the quantity in there, whether you're weighing mass or finding the density of mass or the various parameters of the pathways in the distribution, and that it's all moving. There's moving parts. This side, the water side, is moving at a faster pace and more regularly within a smaller time scale. The rocks right now don't appear to be moving, but they move at a slower pace over a larger time scale. And in a way, that's also the duality contrast. So you see the duality contrast of one being water, one being land. They contrast in duality, and yet they mirror each other at the core of what they are, which is energy. And the patternizations you see in what's going on is energy in play. And energy manifests in so many ways because of patternization and repatternization that can go on in the system that energy is. So that's a very complex thing. All the myriad ways that energy expresses itself. And when they say energy and mass are equivalent, that water is mass, energy, the land is mass and energy, so they're exactly the same thing. Except looking at the qualities, the characteristics, just the most obvious of it, they look so different. And that's not to contradict that they're the same thing. It's actually evidence that the same thing that they are, which is energy, has a dynamic way of expressing itself in a myriad of ways. And the middle way is a big part of that riddle in energy's operation and doing what it does. And you'll see mirror comparisons. You'll see mirroring contrast. So they mirror each other for comparison and how they're the same. They're both energy. and then they mirror each other to show how they're different in contrast. So which is it? Are they different or are the same? Well, if you do the physics says they're the same energy. You have to delve down, deep down into the structure of the complexity, layers and layers of complexity, down to the quantum scale, to see that there's a lot of commonality there in what they are. And then as you scale through the layers, up or down, you're scaling between what makes them appear to be the same thing and then what makes them appear to be so different. And it wouldn't be the middle way if you didn't have the contrast between being the same and being different. It wouldn't be the middle way if within just the basic contrast between water and land, that you didn't have the contrast of one being a fast pace system changing over small scale of time, and the other side in contrast being a slow paced moving system changing over a larger scale of time. So changing over a smaller scale of time, we can see changes within seconds here, microseconds if you really want to get into it. It's changing right now as we look at it. That's a smaller scale of time. Here it's not changing, but over a larger scale of time you will see that it's changing. Small scale contrasted by large scale. Faster movement, which means covering smaller scale of time. Slower movement, covering larger scale of time. So fast, slow, small scale time, large scale time. So all these parameters following the middle way flip-flop. And when you start to do math, one is over the other, one portion put over the other, or one portion put on the side of the other. Maybe you're multiplying two side by side, then you're dividing one above the other. So the geometric dynamics of taking sides. Now, taking sides can be an orientation that goes side to side laterally. Taking sides can be an orientation that means taking sides on top, the top side, or taking sides on the bottom side, or any position in the cycle of positioning in space. And wherever you fall on that cycle, you can have the mirror reflecting pattern back and forth. So the simplest thing to latch on into the system is look for a middle way delineation. And if you followed the series of videos that this one is in, I think this will be video 8. If you looked at the very first video talking about geometry of music and logic, I opened up with the geometry of music, the scales and how they make geometrical shapes, and then the geometrical shapes conforming to the middle way principle, balancing out across two sides. And if you're a music theory person who can follow that and understand that, and seeing the middle way line and then the network of distributions of notes at play, you play these notes in a motion, just like the water, you move, and when you play really well, you play through the scales in a fluid motion. People like it when you play fluidly. It talks to them. It moves like water. And people use music to express the language of water movement, use music to express the language of just about anything, because at the core, the middle way dynamics with a network of dynamic tentacles spreading out from both sides, networking of system dynamics across both sides, and doing it all in accord with a middle way, that harmony tends to want to do reflection, wants to do reciprocation, wants to do balance across a middle way. And if you're reciprocating back and forth between sides that can have a middle way between them, balancing across a middle way. Even something as, what do they say? philosophical and moralistic as law, like the law of the land. Their symbol would be the scale and the two sides of the scale, and that justice would be the balance. And here in nature, it just is balance. And justice talks about balance. And what it just is what it is. And exactly what it just is a system of balance. So maybe you're not a musician who can't use your musical theory prerequisite of understanding the middle way and networks of dynamics, harmonic functionings playing out on both sides and how they mirror each other. If you don't have that and you don't want to spend the time and the years of learning music so then you can have the prerequisite to then start to delve into this system and translate, movement pathways and courses of distributions. Maybe you've played chess. Look at a chessboard and think down the middle, two sides. You're playing the black side. They're playing the white side. You have black squares. You have brown squares. Maybe some chessboards will have black squares and others will have white squares. And then you get equal amount of players, and the players are the energy in the system. They take to motion over the space. And the pathways that they can take to move are different. And so that creates a dynamic dance of play between both sides of the chessboard. So system dynamics is what the game is all about. The same way system dynamics is what music is when you're looking at the music theory. So at the chessboard, you're playing system dynamics across a middle way. Maybe you're not playing both sides, but maybe actually if you're interested in complex systems, try playing both sides of the board. If you want to play chess for a more analytical look at system dynamics, try playing both sides of the board, or get another person who's interested in the same system dynamics at the core of chess to play with you from the perspective of analyzing the system dynamics and not necessarily being an opponent who just simply wants to win over the other. And then you're done and you're like, wow, all we've done is just chased our tails, and all that's left to do is play the same game again, chase our tails again, one wins, one loses, and that's all you ever get out of it. But there's system dynamics going on, and that's the real treasure. That's where the deep diversity and deep yielding of achievements come from. You may not go in there to achieve a win over an opponent, but the things you can gain out of it, they will apply beyond the game. If all you take away from the game is that you won from your opponent, then there's not much to that really, compared to taking away from the game the practice of system dynamics. So maybe it's a chess game, maybe it's a checkers game. There's a reason I'm calling the middle way a universal dynamics, because you can find it in all kinds of fields out there. Maybe you're a chess player, maybe you're a computer science person dealing with bits and ones and zeros, or off circuit and on circuit for transistors. Is it on? Is it off? The movement flowing here is on. The movement flowing here is off. But the movement flowing here sometimes can get so great that it overwhelms. And when you're dealing with transistors next to each other and one is on, one is off, they have to balance out and reflect each other well enough that the energy that can amass in one transistor being on does not overwhelm the other transistor needing to be off. And you'll discover here that sometimes the energy of the waves here and the electrons moving through transistors, they probably travel in their microscopic scale, electron microscope scale, they probably travel in electron flow waveforms. And so waveforms, just like water, on that tiny, tiny, tiny scale down there for electrons. And they can probably have an overwhelming flow of waves down there on that scale in the same way that we can have an overwhelming flow. And it will turn this alternate side, which is having its motion off right now. The rocks aren't really moving right now, but when the energy is overwhelming here, it can overwhelm this area and it's no longer off. It'll turn this area on in a wild whirlpool, and then you'll get this side in motion just like that side is in motion. That happens over a longer scale of time. And then this small system here is connected to energy systems playing out on the larger global scale, atmospheric, and then underwater geological tectonic plate stuff can send motion into the water. And middle way dynamics in the balance of the atmosphere, or making or breaking what the climate is, what the weather is, in the global geological tectonics, trying to balance out according to gravity's demand in relationship to the thermal stuff going on from the core of the earth outward, and the configurations of mass all throughout the geological system of the entire earth. And more than that, that's a Coast Guard grade of helicopter, so it very well could be the Coast Guard. I don't know if it's a rescue or just exercise. Even if they're not rescuing, they still have to go out and exercise. Whatever your trade or craft or prowess is, it's maintained through practice, rehearsing, practicing. So if you're a fast runner, the only way to continue being a fast runner is to go out and practice running fast. If you work with deciphering, understanding, analyzing complex systems, you got to be out there practicing. So maybe you don't have the water out here in the location that you are, somewhere out there in the world. Maybe you can't swim and you don't want to bother with that, and you don't really have to. Back to what I was saying, it doesn't have to be middle way dynamics going on here at the shore. It could be middle way dynamics looking at a chess game, looking at computers, transistors, one on one side, one being on, one being off. All kinds of places. Maybe looking at plants and seeing why the plant will put one leaf splay here and then the next leaf here and then the next leaf here, trying to balance itself out in the middle way. But maybe there's something also metabolic in the plant's progress of growing and the whole complex system of its biology that also has the middle way dynamics playing out in it. So it's not just a manifestation for simply balancing the plant on one side and the other, but multitasking the middle way dynamics throughout the complexity of its systems. So system is very complex. Look for a middle way dynamics to latch on into. Even in people relationships, middle way dynamics, the very structure of human continuation is along the lines of a middle way. We see in biology where life forms can reproduce and continue themselves without the contrast of one being female and one being male. You can have hermaphrodites, but for some reason in nature, the contrast of having a male and female come together in union for the continuation of what the entire species is as a whole, that the entire species as a whole to continue actually requires the meeting of what would otherwise be seen as opposites. And when they come together, that's some of the richest experience people know. You know, the physical sensation of coming together for reproduction, sex, and love, and all of that is a very, very powerful thing. And the powerful thing being analog to the relevance of it in the complex system of being a life form. So you'll have a man and woman join together, and there's something more beneficial to that. And you can't argue with it being a way of paying homage to the universal system of middle way dynamics. Why shouldn't that be encoded in us through and through biologically, in our way of thinking, in our way of using our minds, in our way of using our bodies, in our ways of reproducing, coming together across a middle way between what would otherwise be seen as opposite sexes. But when two people of the opposite sex come together in a union for reproduction, they don't feel separate at all. Anyway, I'm not here to get into something that puts me into a rating that's not suitable for my category of YouTube presentation. So many places in which you can look into complex systems and find an easy middle way dynamics expression to latch onto. And so from that middle way expression, just watch it. Watch it. You can even forget about it being a middle way line. Forget about the middle way line distinguishing both. Just watch the interplay, and from there you grow a connection that's beyond just one aspect of the full complexity. Now you'll see something else, or maybe you'll hear something else in relationship to what's going on along those lines. See something else, hear something else. Maybe you play in the water down there, feel something else. And so you'll see patterns within patterns, and over time they build up in the same way that a musician starts off in music with just one note. That's all you know how to play at the very beginning. You add another note to it, and it can take years, but eventually one day you're playing music as fluid as water. Sounds like you know the song and story of water because you play it so fluidly. And whether you're a chess player, people start off just moving one piece at a time and being clueless about the whole grand system of it. And even the greatest chess masters started at that point. And they play their game so fluidly in the awareness of what's going on and what the consequences are after a move that they haven't even made yet. And using that to win games more often than not, that the odds are put in their favor to win rather than losing. But that's, of course, if they're playing to win. Incentives put out there just to win over an opponent don't seem very deep to me. Seems like a very shallow approach to what it's really all about. And takes focus away from the complex system dynamics going on and the real treasure of what life evolves around. Life evolves around a complex system. Even if you go out there and win a game and championship and you bring home the trophy, maybe there are some winnings, all of that still has to apply to the complex system of what your life is. Whether it's me doing it, it'll have to apply to what the complex system of my life is for it to continue in what I would find or you would find to be a worthwhile life. And if you're not finding it to be a worthwhile life, you'll go out there looking again and again for something that will make it feel like that. Satisfaction, accomplishment, completion. And so you go out there trying to win another game, keep doing it, and because the satisfaction never totally comes. But when you truly get into the game through and through for what it is, at depth, the idea of winning over an opponent easily gets shadowed out, faded away, overwhelmed by the vast treasure of richness in the fuller body of what's really going on in terms of dynamics, in terms of energy, in terms of effect between all sides, including me being here or you being here, assuming as an observer, but that doesn't mean that you're excluded from being a part of it. You can take a step and fall off of this and end up down there getting washed around, or you can deliberately walk down there safely and end up down there and splash around for fun. And one would be injury, and the other way of getting down there would be just a fun, loving time for a good experience of it. One would be a good experience, one would be a bad experience, or maybe you don't want to look at a good-bad contrast. One would be a pleasurable experience and one would be a painful experience. And even there, in just looking at my experience or your experience possibilities here, you'll find the middle way contrast between a good experience or bad experience, a pleasurable experience or a painful experience. So all of it is a learning experience regardless about the universal dynamics going on. And it was our past, it is our present, and it is the future. So you get with the song and dance of it, you get with the program of it, and you evolve. And you evolve. And the significance of this cannot be understated. You can be out here with the knowledge that you can gain from complex system dynamics and predict when waves are coming before they're even in sight, before they've even reared up in the water, just because of chain link dynamics and the patternizations. Predicting earthquakes and the tsunamis that are lifted up out of the water by earthquakes. And all of those are important to survival of people within the area that those things happen. So your life depends on it, and life evolves on and on. And so with the experience of learning the complex systems of what life is all about is essentially destiny, because you can't go into the future. The future is destiny. Destiny is about becoming a part of the future or creating the future. And there just isn't a future if you're not in harmony with life and what it's doing and able to dance with it well enough to continue being a part of it rather than overrun by it because you're just not able to keep in step with what it has coming. And simply because you just don't know and you just don't understand the music of it, the song and dance of it. And so you step out of beat, out of time, out of place, out of condition, out of focus, out of everything that's required, everything that's required to come together in a harmonic union for a good relationship with existence in the world. And so it's a learning process in the scale of our individual lifetimes, and it's a learning process on the larger scale of the entire species of humanity or all of life in general, a learning process over the eons, over the thousands of years, millions of years. And the complexities, the places where complex systems need to be understood, they keep appearing. There's smaller scales in which to unravel the mysteries, complex systems, and then there's larger scales, larger than the ocean, larger than the earth, the entire universe, maybe universes beyond the universe. So you take on what you can. I take on what I can, not all of it. Luckily, there's 7 billion people on Earth, so maybe 8 billion, 9 billion now. Anyway, the number's growing. Hopefully it's still growing. Maybe, should it be growing? Should it not be growing? I'm kind of stuck in the middle of where it should be, and maybe that's the good place to be, stuck in the middle with the middle way. And learn from both sides of the matter in balance. So with all the people on earth, everybody can take up an interest in something. Doesn't have to all be the same thing. Diversity is the treasure. And the diverse, the DI in diversity, about two, multiplicity. And that's what the middle way is about, the beginning of diversity, where diversity begins, where you start to see the contrast of sides. And diversity in unity rather than diversity in separation. And that even where there is separation, the ocean separate from the land, even though they intersperse, they still don't fully dilute into each other. So you can say separation, but at the same time, it's one experience. So, and again, it wouldn't be the middle way without separation in contrast with unity. And from the middle way perspective, the separation is okay because it's part of the oneness of which unity is also a part of. So that they both have their place. And so before you go around trying to take all things separate and make them into one, trying to maybe solidify the water to make it one with the solidity of the land, or trying to liquefy the land to make it one with the fluidity of the water, before you go doing that, you might want to check your perspective about what unity is in terms of what reality is. That maybe separation really is an aspect of unity, and that unity is an aspect of separation, that it's all one energy, and that you couldn't have the engine of life and existence at all without contrast to push against each other and drive the dance like a motor, contrasting of pushing the pistons up and down the engine of life. Same thing with computers, contrasting between the on and off of transistors to begin the engine of programming function that becomes all kinds of complexity. And it really is a cycle over and over again, the same thing. And yet, as monotonous and redundant and trapping as it may sound, in the context of complex systems, that running around in circles chasing your tail can happen in diverse modes. It'll still be the same thing at the core of it, but it can happen in diverse modes, which means you can grow diversity from there, which means you can enter into all kinds of complexity and have an ever-changing world within your small little sphere of being a part of it, inescapable. So the middle way as a core aspect of reality, I don't think you escape it. You can travel as far out of the universe as you want, and you carry it in you, with you. You are it. And then even in the universe, it's the universe. And you get to another universe, you'll just be sitting with a contrast over the middle way between the universe that you came from and the universe that you went to, dealing with that contrast back and forth. And out of that, you'll keep growing, no doubt about it. Growth and learning and expanding is part of the middle way. So, I think I'm satisfied with this part of it. I'll have to take time before another video. I think I've said enough to cover this as video number 8.